The world we live in hardly enjoys any harmony, all because of flawed perceptions locked in a Cold War mentality. As tensions between China and the West continue to heat up, China has become the target of attacks by the US-led Western countries. This is because many in the West perceive China as a threat to American dominance in the world. This perception is totally flawed. As the conflict in Ukraine is playing out, Russia has become the target of attacks and endless sanctions by the US-led Western countries. Again, this is because the West perceives Russia as a threat to their security and the American dominance in the world. This perception is totally flawed too. But precisely because of flawed perceptions held by the major players in the world, we live in a world that is troubled with Cold War mentality, and flashpoints have already turned into armed conflicts. A new harmony of the world we live in can only begin to surface when the US-led Western countries realize their flawed perceptions. The fact is, China is becoming more influential in world affairs by growing economically. But why shouldn't China grow? Is it not a human right to seek a better life? But China is certainly not a threat to America militarily, nor has China any desire to deprive the American people of a good life. But America, with its allies, is putting up a concerted effort to put China down, to deprive the Chinese people a better life they are working very hard for. The fact is, Russia is feeling less and less secure due to the expansion of NATO eastward. But why should NATO expand eastward? Is it not the expansion of NATO that is moving its military infrastructure ever closer to the Russian border? It is a fact that over the past 30 years, Russia has been patiently trying to come to an agreement with the leading NATO countries regarding the principles of equal and indivisible security in Europe. But America, with its allies, is putting up a concerted effort to put Russia down, to deprive the Russian people security within Europe that they desire so very much. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to a redivision of the world, as well as the norms of international law, which became the whims of those who declared themselves the winners of the Cold War. A state of euphoria created by the feeling of absolute superiority coupled with arrogance resulted in self-serving decisions that ignore the concerns of others. A bloody military operation was waged against Belgrade without the UN Security Council's sanction. During the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, 5 guided bombs hit the People's Republic of China embassy in Belgrade, killing 3 Chinese journalists and outraging the Chinese people. The Chinese were told CIA had identified the wrong coordinates for a Yugoslav military target on the same streets. Then came the turn of Iraq, Libya, and Syria. In the invasion of Iraq without any legal ground, we witnessed lies made at the highest state level and voiced from the high UN rostrum. The illegal use of military power against Libya and the distortion of all the UN Security Council decisions on Libya ruined the country and pushed it towards a humanitarian catastrophe into the vortex of a civil war which has continued there for years. A similar fate was also prepared for Syria. The combat operations conducted by the Western coalition in that country without the Syrian government's approval or UN Security Council sanction can only be defined as intervention. Witnessing NATO's 5 rounds of expansion eastward, should Russia not be concerned? Overall, it appears that nearly everywhere in many regions of the world where the United States brought its law and order, this created bloody, non-healing wounds and the curse of international terrorism and extremism. In 1972, Richard Nixon's visit to China opened the door for the formation of diplomatic relations between the world's richest country and the world's most populous country. It also ended 25 years of no communication or diplomatic ties between the two countries, shifting the power dynamics of the Cold War and playing a part in China's transition from impoverished isolation to a new role as an economic partner to the United States and a growing global power. But 50 years on, the anniversary of Nixon's historic visit comes to a low point in US-China relations. Many in Washington now view China as a growing economic and military threat, while an increasingly assertive and nationalistic China has pushed back on what it sees as American interference in its affairs. China's economy will overtake the US. In terms of purchasing price parity, China's economy is already significantly bigger than that of the US. To that extent, China's success will challenge a conventional wisdom. That is, the only way is the Western way. China showed the world there is a Chinese way to progress and prosperity. China is viewed as a threat to a lot of people because of its sheer size and because of the unity of the people. However, does it mean that China wants to be a superpower the way the Soviet Union was or the way the US is? Has China ever passed judgment in other countries or wanted to export its governing system and its philosophy to others? No. China is a civilization. China is too ancient and wise to ever want such a thing. Throughout its entire history, numerous tribes from the north came inside the Middle Land to occupy territories, rule kingdoms, even the entire Middle Kingdom, only to become assimilated into the culture of the Middle Land, enriching this very civilization. It is a very different mentality from that of the West, which has a missionary tradition. The Americans, without embarrassment, call themselves an exceptional power with a manifest destiny, which is to spread its values to the whole world. China does not have such an instinct. It is not in its history. It is certainly not in its interest. One day, the US will realize that China's nature is different from the nature of the US, and there is a greater possibility of coexistence and cooperation than putting China down. One day, the US will realize that Russia's nature is different from the nature of the USSR, and there too is greater possibility of coexistence and cooperation than proxy wars. A new harmony is within reach for mankind, but the Cold War mentality needs to